So yes, so what we're doing is we're finishing up Manly P. Hall's, one of his, I think is a very pivotal work, not as pivotal as The Secret Teachings of All Ages, which we're going to get to tonight, but I do think it is quite amazing the scope and depth of what he was able to do with this document, with this writing of his. Every chapter is getting deeper and deeper into each of the degrees and what it takes on what it takes for you as an individual to truly encompass and have your character be formed based upon these degrees that you're taking. And as it goes on, you reach a higher state, higher level of awareness, your consciousness expands, and you truly become a better human in the world. And so we're just going to get right to it as we move into the topic. It's the very last addition to the Lost Keys of Freemasonry is going to be called the Egyptian Initiate. And here we are. It starts off with these two quotes. One is from the hymn to Amun-Ra. It's, "Hail to thee, Ra, Lord of Law, whose shrine is hidden." And then the next one is the Book of the Master. "Death is swallowed up in light." Early Masonic historians such as Albert Mackey, Robert Freck Gold, and Albert Pike were of single purpose in their efforts to establish a definite correspondence between the Hyramic legend of Freemasonry and the Osiris myth as expounded in the initiatory rituals of the Egyptians. In Morals and Dogma of the Scottish Rite, Albert Pike sums up briefly the writings of Plutarch on the allegories of the Osirian cult, and even calls attention to the probability that the virgin weeping over the broken column is Isis, the mother of mysteries, lamenting the death of her husband and brother, whose body was hidden in the great pillar in the palace of the king of Byblos. And so already what we're talking about there is we have the Osirian myth, Osiris being one of the gods of Egypt with his wife Isis. And this myth has to do with what we spoke about in the last episode, has to do with Osiris being torn apart by his brother Set into tiny pieces, and 13 to be exact, and them all scattered to the winds of the world. Isis, in her weeping state, had to muster up the courage to go find her husband's missing pieces. And then she found all 12, and then she had to figure out what the 13th was. The 13th piece, obviously, is the phallic image, right, of Osiris. And that is that symbolizing that brilliant psychosexual fluid, that energy, that prana or chi throughout the body as it rises up and kind of gives life force to your whole being. And so he's kind of what he's doing here is in these Masonic allegories and myths, they're showing you the importance of the Osirian cult at that time and of what the mythology of Osiris and his bride Isis is. Vindicated from any taint of heresy by such illustrious precedent, the modern student of Masonic philosophy and symbolism may therefore direct his attention to the antiquity of the craft, confident that a scholarly examination of ancient theological and theonic systems can but add luster to his order and credit to his own name. Too long has Freemasonry been diverted from its proper ends into strange and irrelevant courses. But in each generation, a few of the better informed brethren, through their untiring efforts, have assisted in preserving the high philosophic aspect of the symbols of the craft. People these days, well, I would consider Manly P. Hall being one of those people who's in this day and age, even though he is dead, his legacy lives on in his writings and his gathering of sacred teachings and knowledge throughout time. Another one I would say is a gentleman by the name of Randall Carlson. He's a brilliant man and also a Freemason, but more of a geologist and a scholar. And so I highly recommend going out there and watching a bunch of Randall Carlson's work. I realized Randall Carlson when I was listening to Graham Hancock. Both of those gentlemen are a 1-2 punch in the alternative history, but also in just the science and history of the world as it be. I think they are much much wiser, Hancock and Carlson, than many of the mainstream scientists that we hear on a day-to-day basis. And so, or go over to Graham Hancock's Netflix documentary that he has. It's quite brilliant. Yes, we agree that he is great. And so, it is most unfortunate, yes, tragic. Oh, yes. Also, pause. Also, oh, yeah. Also, Scott Walter. Okay, great. Everyone looking into Scott Walter. And the geologer is the correct pronunciation. Thank you, Devlin. I am still working on my English. It is definitely a second language. Here we go. It is most unfortunate, yes, tragic, that the great Egyptian initiatory ritual of the coming forth by day should, through some accident, have been misnamed the Book of the Dead. So anything you've heard of called the book of, like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, is its actual name is Coming Forth by Day. And somewhere in the history of things, it was mistranslated, and now we call it the Book of the Dead. Interesting enough. Coming Forth by Day seems to be a lot different than Book of the Dead to me, but I don't know. Maybe whoever translated it had a better understanding of things than those who probably have a better understanding of things. So there's that. The latter term is a fascinating one. The popular mind picked it up and has rendered the correction of the misstatement almost impossible. Recognizing Egypt to have been the cradle of superior culture and most exalted philosophy, and admitting the almost undeniable evidence that the Egyptian mysteries were the progenitors of modern Freemasonry. It is most sad that a critical dissection of the Egyptian theological system is impeded and rendered almost impossible by the comparatively late and incomplete forms of the ancient writing now available on the subject. It is quite evident to the Egyptologists that such papyruses are those of Annie and Hennifer are incomplete and inadequate renditions of older and more complete writings yet unrecovered. The Book of the Dead is a treasure house of Masonic lore to those who can realize that the ancient work has a significant meaning throughout, and were available in a complete form, would render the whole subject of philosophy considerably more lucid. A systemic effort is now being made to render somewhat more intelligent the ancient funeral text by translating the hieroglyphics upon and within the important mummy cases now reposing in several great museums of Europe and Egypt. Interesting enough, Rogan just had on Zahi Hawass, right? Major modern day Egyptologist who says that he is the end-all be-all person on all that is Egyptology. He would definitely scoff at Manly P. Hall in his work, stating that there is nothing in that is science, because he already scoffed at a lot of major things that kind of are also talking about these, let alone his great war with Graham Hancock. I will state that Joe Rogan had him on for 1 hour, maybe a little over than that, and he basically ended it abruptly, just because, in his own Joe Rogan nice way, just because Zahi Hawass was basically kind of, he was saying, if there was anything that we don't know, or there are pictures that I don't have that I'm making statements of, you can just go to my book, which nobody has. In Rogan's Law, like, Jamie, pull it up. Jamie always pulls things up, everything. He can do it all. And yet for some reason, Jamie couldn't find any of those pictures that Zahi Hawass was talking about. So, it's up to you to figure out if you believe Zahi Hawass, modern day Egyptologist and master of all history and things, or do we, want to take in more of these writings like Manly P. Hall and its understanding of mythology, and Egypt, as well as Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, and now these gentlemen who have used a form of LiDAR to detect these rods that go straight down for miles underneath the pyramid. And then there's actually a whole water reservoir underneath the Great Pyramid, something that Zahi Hawass first said wasn't there. And then Rogan re-asked the question multiple times and then admitted there was a water reservoir underneath, one that actually enough Zahi Hawass had Mr. Beast enter into on a show or something. I haven't seen it. I wouldn't watch that. But interesting enough, Mr. Beast swam underneath the Great Temple. Sounds a little weird to me. But neither here nor there. No conspiracies abound here. Let's move on. It is quite evident again to the Egyptologists that such papyruses as those of Annie and Hennifer are incomplete and inadequate renditions of older and more complete writings yet recovered. The Book of the Dead is a treasure house of Masonic lore. To those who can realize that the ancient work has a significant meaning throughout, and were it available in a complete form, would render the whole subject of philosophy considerably more lucid. This could be very helpful. A systemic effort is now being made to render somewhat more intelligent the ancient funeral text by translating the hieroglyphics upon and within the important mummy case now reposing in several great museums of Europe and Egypt. At the present time, it is only possible to speculate as to the Masonic importance of this research, but it is safe to prophesy that if the truth be discovered, popular Masonry must give way to a more profound and correspondingly more valuable interpretation of its mission. Every serious member of the order should sense the importance of the coffin texts and possible clues to a more recondite and valuable interpretation of the massive symbols and allegories which have been woven into the fabric of Freemasonry. Coming events cast their shadows before them, and two most significant occurrences are indicative of the nature of what may be expected. A remarkable scroll has recently emerged from the confusion, which seems to render the whole subject of Egyptian mythology more confounded. Some ancient scribes suffering from penury, the disease of the learned, apparently entrusted much wisdom to an inferior grade of papyrus, with the result that we have a priceless but dilapidated monument to his erudition. Egyptologists are rather prone to view the archaic treasure as a Kabbalistic treaty designed to render more or less systemic the confused fables intimated in the Book of the Dead. The intelligentsia have pronounced the manuscript a meaningless rigmarole of metaphysical jargon. Of course, the modernists, who deify the instant, will scoff at the possibility that the Egyptian scribe, long dead, has contributed anything of practical value to this illuminated age. But in the last analysis, who is wise while Pilate's questions remained unanswered? While Pilate's questions remain, I'm guessing he's speaking of Pontius Pilate, right? The man who did the deed back in the day, whole cross, thing, crucifix, all that. As well as to go back up here and realize that he stated how Egyptologists are rather prone to view this archaic treasure as a Kabbalistic treaty designed to render more or less systemic the confused fables intimated in the Book of the Dead. So to me, that sounds like if it's a Kabbalistic treaty, it's talking about the ancient Kabbalah, right? Jewish mysticism and the tree of life. And then just to understand that it's not just a Jewish mystical process, but stems back in Pythagoras, the great philosopher, music of the spheres, understanding the decad, as well as many other things. He's got his number theories and golden mean ratios and all that. And so, and it moves forward. There is Christian Kabbalah as well. There's Hermetic Kabbalah. And so if we understand that, we understand it as the system that helps us link correspondences together through a certain system like the Tree of Life using Hebrew alphabet, which is both letters and numbers and many other correspondences from each alphabet. And it also interconnects with the tarot as well. And so there's a large storehouse of alchemical and occult knowledge stored within then this Book of the Dead, I think is what they're trying to get at. Mayhap this old scroll will prove to be the lost key to a most confusing situation, if it reveals the gods to be but the personifications of great scientific principles, and that theology is an exact science and not a hopeless confusion of doubts. The present century may be redeemed from the unhappy end to which it presents attitudes must inevitably bring it. The Egyptians were far in advance of their time. Long before the Christian era, the Egyptian priests had traced the circulation of the blood, composed books on anatomy and physics, had developed glass-blowing, licensed dentists and occultists, and if the Ebers Papyrus be authority, brewed excellent beer. It was in the dark land of Chem that many sciences had their beginnings, as did also several noble schools of philosophy and ethics. During the glory of the empire, the priests served the heavenly fire, not only using it, the mysteries of alchemy, but as an abstract symbol of the supreme good. Again, a little side note, alchemy breaks down into alchem, or it's basically Chem being the land of Egypt, and the black in it talks about the black sands of Egypt. So alchemy. A philosopher writing nearly 400 years ago made a suggestion which modern archaeologists might as well reflect upon. He said, "We should remember that the dark and apparently worthless earth which is beneath our feet also yields the precious jewels and metals from which we fashion our most glorious adornments. Shall the archaeologist seek physical fragments alone, or wedding science to philosophy, sift the dust of ages for intellectual treasures far more precious than the chips of ancient empire? The second discovery is of direct and most intense Masonic interest. A papyrus of the Book of the Dead definitely proves by the prompter's marks and notes scattered throughout that his strange document, presumed to be concerned solely with the destiny of the disembodied spirit, was actually a dramatic ceremonial staged by living actors, presumably in the recesses of the temples. The actual context of the manuscript renders it evident that the play could have none other than a sacred purpose, and is mutilated fragment bearing witness of those arcane rites attended upon the installation of the initiate of the Osirian cult. While this has long been suspected by the more profound Masonic scholars, the proof has previously been lacking and will be welcomed as one of the links of a seemingly endless chain. But the question may well be asked, what does all this mean to the average Freemason whose acquaintance with Egyptology is hopelessly superficial? And what may he glean from the ancient symbols which will enable him to sense more profoundly and apply more diligently the varieties of his order? If the identity of the Osiris and the Hyramic myths be accepted, then the Book of the Dead is the open sesame of symbolic Masonry, revealing a hidden beauty beneath the rituals, an unsuspected splendor in the symbols, and a divine purpose actuating the whole of Masonic procedure. The symbols of the craft have been superficially interpreted for centuries, but even Albert Pike confessed that as far as his research had permitted him to penetrate, the actual meanings of the curious figures had been hopelessly, and he even feared irretrievably, lost. For lack of adequate meaning, the whole mass of allegories lose the name of action and no longer impel the neophyte to accomplishment of a nobler state. Right? So, yeah. The stuff that we have today that we're missing out, the keys and the symbols and the myth, the connecting between the Osirian cult, the Osirian mythology, and that of the Egyptologists and the mythologies of the Book of the Dead, or the coming forth by day. If we can integrate that back into our modern day Freemasonic literature, it's in the literature. If we can just make it a little more prevalent within our, within the brethren of that order, right? Again, I'm not a Freemason. I just love this talking about this stuff because I'm a human. And so I'm not a Freemason by outward extension of trade, but on the path of the adept, we all have the ability to become a quote unquote Freemason, right? It's just, what does it mean? It means, do you have the ability to understand that there is more to our existence, that your body and consciousness they're connected, just that body mind syzygy that's going on, as well as do you want to have fit character and walk the middle path to become the best human, right? Aristotle's eudaimonia. Can you garner happiness in this world? And not that stale kind of happiness, like I just got a lollipop, right? Or ice cream happiness, or the sun just came out, which is a lot closer to a style of happiness. But the kind of happiness that is an embodiment of your world and your internal world and your external world, right? And that's what Plato calls the good. Is that when we're balancing our character within, right? In the Platonic dialogues in the Republic, he speaks of the systems of the state in correlation with the systems of the human person, in correlation with how we understand the divine. Thank you, Lightning. That's very nice. And so what's going on here is what we're trying to understand is we're trying to understand in the Platonic sense, he has the philosopher kings, right? The warrior class, or the auxiliary, and the craftsman. And that reflects how the human body works out, right? It's the gold, silver, and bronze. In the same way, it's also how we understand and talk about justice, courage, and fortitude, right? That last one, somebody else find what that last one is. I can't think of it at the moment. But what they're talking about is you're trying to be the highest ideal of your human person. And I think that's really important. So we move on. Interesting enough. Thank you. Yeah, nice. Let's keep talking about things that pertain to the topic, right? Thus, the mysteries were regarded as the substitute for death and also as the second womb from which the initiate was born into the sphere of wisdom. In Egypt, the mysteries, or institutions of philosophic rebirth, were called Isis, and those born out of the temple were designated the sons of Isis. Now, through the death of Osiris, her husband, this goddess, had donned the badges of mourning, and through the loss of the word, symbolized by the phallus of Osiris, had become the great widow. Hence, those born out of her, the philosophic elect, were termed the widow's son, a designation which was clung to the Freemason even in this age, right? Quite brilliant, who can save the widow's son? That is us, because we have lost Osiris as our father, and our widow, Isis, is out there looking for him, which is, it's a great mythology. There's a lot of stories written about that. The lost father figure, the mom who has to go it alone, and the son who must really understand his place in the world. Upon an ancient column was an inscription thus translated by Diodorus: I am Osiris the king, I am the eldest son of Saturn. I was born of the brilliant and magnificent egg, and my substance is of the same nature as that which composes light. This statement reveals the condition of such as has been raised by the strong grip of the lion's paw. The brilliant and mysterious egg from which the immortal mortal issues is the temple of the house of the mysteries, the sphere of the wise. It is what would now be called a Masonic lodge, and he who issues from it feigns like wears a new body, and the vestment composed of the light, that light which is imparted to the soul by the glorious arcana of the ritual. It is, therefore, said of the candidate that he descends into the darkness of the tomb, and, after having wandered in the gray halls of Hades, is reborn, and received as one risen from the grave. The instrument and the adornment with which he is invested bear witness to this achievement, and he is regarded as more than ordinary mortal. He is of a race apart, and though not actually worthy of worship, is still entitled to definite veneration. This high ethical order, this noble and sacred mystery, this is Freemasonry. Anything less is not Freemasonry, but clouds the great purpose for which the order was devised in the infancy of mankind. Thus, from the crude fragments let to us of ancient Egyptian manuscripts and their commentaries, we receive a great inspiration and ennobling realization of our one purpose. We are promised that if we serve faithfully and consecrate ourselves to the purpose for which the mysteries schools came into existence, the word will ultimately be returned, and with it will come the full understanding of the deep and sublime mystery of philosophy as the rational substitute for death. Awesome. So that is the Lost Keys of Freemasonry. Right. And so how does that relate to, again, I'm going to bring it back to our literature of modern day, our stories of modern day myth, which are, comic books, anime, film, manga. All these things are modern day Zeuses, right? And more like modern day Hercules, right? Modern day Achilles characters. All these characters which now we see them as Satoru Gojo, Itachi Uchiha, Naruto and Sasuke. Itadori and Tanjiro and Kirito, all those characters I think are what help us understand and to be able to really fully take on the human experience as a whole. Each one of these characters goes through tragic and massive amounts of suffering, and yet they can smile through the hard times and find reasons to go forth. And I think that is something that we everyday individuals in the world can bring back to our modern world, which is devoid of substance at times and also lacks meaning, because that's what a postmodern world does to the modern period. The postmodern world is kind of one of those things that says, the ideas of relativism is that all things are beautiful, right? All art is true art. And I think that is a really important question to ask, is like, what is true art? That's the same question as what is true modern myth? Not all comic books and film and anime and storytelling is created equal, because I think there's such things as aesthetics, which is why I think the Renaissance period was so important for, and the many Renaissances we have had, is that it brings things back to harmony with such things as the golden mean, sacred geometry, myth, the collective unconscious, and that what Marceli Eliade would talk about is that eternal return that we're continually coming back to, is that the Renaissance period is kind of due again for meaning to be brought back in the world. What that will look like, I don't know. However, right now there's an explosion of amazing storytelling in our anime and manga these days. And I know a lot of people want to state that, well, that's a cartoon, but it's not just a cartoon, right? Like, why is it not that? Because it's something that captures adult themes of true human, what like humans go through, like with human nature and how we experience our everyday life. They just take it to the next level, and they can they give you a little flair. They add a true magical system that you can see aesthetically, so you can kind of understand how it works. If it's not in anime, it's in our high fantasy and epic fantasy, like in the Wheel of Time. And right now on Amazon Prime, the Wheel of Time is out there, and it's taking on Robert Jordan's work. Robert Jordan was known as the second, he was known as Little Tolkien because of his writing was so expansive. And the characterization, there were so many characters, and what was going on the scales of black versus white, good versus evil. It takes a lot more Eastern mystic, Taoist angle than it does the Judeo-Christian mythos of good versus evil. But they both have their place. And just Wheel of Time is the one that's really prevalent right now because of Amazon Prime bringing it back. And so why do I bring that up is their magical system is showing you a different thing. You can watch my video on the one power and how it works, but it really integrates the 5 elements and the 8 trigrams of the Bagua, of the Taoist medicine, as well as the, like I said, the 5 elements of the Chinese medicine. And it integrates them in a way that you can truly understand how to separate energies and then use those energies in an alchemical way to really use them in the world. This one's got high drama, so there's a lot of certain kind of battles, because it's done. The idea of high fantasy is that it takes on the more Arthurian kind of models and puts it out in the world where we're using swords and magic and horseback and along a wide territory of a world. But again, if you don't like the analogy of the anime or the manga or the comic books, let's go to the analogy of Wheel of Time or the analogy of Dune or a lot of our sci-fi and different things like that. It's really bringing in these archetypes of good versus evil, how a normal person ascends to the heights of a demigod and challenges the great demiurge, the great adversary, and wins. Sometimes they lose, but a lot of times they win in one way or the other. And a lot of times we don't understand what that winning is, but we can break free through watching good things. And it goes back to what I was saying is, what is true art? And what are these teachings of the Golden Path or Adeptship? What are the teachings of the mystic Mason, the Rosicrucian, the Templar, right? The Pythagorean, the Neoplatonic theurgist. There's a lot of different names that they come across, Sufis and whatnot, masters and sages. But what we're coming to understand is that what truly makes something beautiful or a true story is the harmony that it's understanding. And harmony is going to be your archetypes. And when the archetypes are truly coming out, we can really start to understand stories because they hit us on a soul level. I think that's what it's about. It's understanding your own soul and understanding then the world and how it works. So what we're moving on from there is I really want people to understand the Hyramic legend. So we went through the understanding that Osiris, the Osiris cult, is one thing. And then when we understand the Masonic legend of Solomon's Temple and Hiram Abiff, I think that really will expand upon what's going on with these stories and with the human soul as such. So let's go on. So this book, Secret Teachings of All Ages, is a masterpiece in and of itself. And it's basically like an encyclopedia or a dictionary of mythology and stories through time and culture, magic and esoteric, and different things that truly will help you move through and understand that through world literature. We have been guiding towards higher wisdom for a very long time. So we're going to go to the Hyramic legend. I believe it's chapter 16. Secret Teachings of All Ages, Manly P. Hall. Then Solomon, the beloved of God, builder of the everlasting house and grand master of the Lodge of Jerusalem, ascended the throne of his father David. He consecrated his life to the erection of a temple to God and a palace for the kings of Israel. David's faithful friend, Hiram, king of Tyre, hearing that a son of David sat upon the throne of Israel, sent messages of congratulations and offers of assistance to the new ruler. In his History of the Jews, Josephus mentions that copies of the letters passing between the two kings were then to be seen both at Jerusalem and at Tyre. Despite Hiram's lack of appreciation for the 20 cities of Galilee, which Solomon presented to him upon the completion of the temple, the two monarchs remained the best of friends. Both were famous for their wit and wisdom, and when they exchanged letters, each devised puzzling questions to test the mental ingenuity of the other. Solomon made an agreement with Hiram of Tyre, promising a vast amount of barley, wheat, corn, wine, and oil as wages for the mason and carpenters from Tyre who were to assist the Jews in the erection of the temple. Hiram also supplied cedars and other fine trees, which were made into rafts and floated down the sea to Joppa, whence they were taken inland by Solomon's workmen to the temple site. So we get into history of what's going on. You have Solomon, and he needs the temple built, and he's got a friend in Tyre, and his name is Hiram. Different Hiram, the Hiram Abiff, who is struck and dies by the three ruffians. So this is laying the outline of what's going on. He's like, I'm going to give you these things. I need your help with your best craftsmen and workers. And he's like, okay. Because of his great love for Solomon, Hiram of Tyre sent also the grand master of the Dionysiac, right? The Dionysiac architects of Hiram Abiff, or Chiram. That's how he writes it in here. Abiff, a widow's son. A widow's son, huh? Interesting. Who had no equal among the craftsmen of the earth. Hiram is described as being a Tyrian by birth, but of Israelitish descent, and a second Bezalel honored by his king with the title of fathers. That comes from the Freemasons' Pocket Companion, published in 1771. Describes Hiram as the most cunning, skillful, and curious workman that ever lived, whose abilities were not confused to building alone, but extended to all kinds of work, whether in gold, silver, brass, or iron, whether in linen, tapestry, or embroidery, whether considered as an architect, statuary, founder, or designer, separately or together. He equally excelled from his designs, and under his direction all the rich and splendid furniture of the temple. And as several appendages were begun, carried on, and finished, Solomon appointed him in his absence to fill the chair as deputy grand master, and in his presence senior grand warden, master of work, and general overseer of all artists, as well those whom David had formerly procured from Tyre and Sidon, and those Hiram should now send. That's from modern Masonic writer. Oh, it says modern Masonic writers differ as to accuracy of that very last sentence about David formerly procuring certain people. But that's interesting, right? So the Dionysiac architects, the head of that is Hiram Abiff. He's a widow's son. We just learned what the widow's son was, right? It's Isis being the widow because she has yet to put her husband back together, who was torn apart by Set, right? Chaos, Typhon, by that, the that negation of life, trying to understand his way in the world as well. And talking about how great he is. He kind of knows how to put great things in amazing spaces and create those amazing spaces. So interesting enough. Although an immense amount of labor was involved in the construction, Solomon's temple, in the words of George Oliver, was only a small building and very inferior in point of size to some of our churches. That's interesting. The number of buildings contiguous to it and the vast treasure of gold and precious stones used in its construction consecrated a great amount of wealth within the temple area. In the midst of the temple stood the Holy of Holies, which is a Led Zeppelin song. So it's written all over the place. Zeppelin also occultists in their own right, magicians, and Jimmy Page did own Bullskin House for a while, which was Aleister Crowley's home, where he basically, the Abbey of Thelema was set up, and he did a lot of practices with AA, which was an offshoot of the Golden Dawn in the early 1900s. The more you know. Sometimes called the Oracle. So the Holy Holies was sometimes called the Oracle. It was an exact cube, each dimension being 20 cubits, and exemplified the influence of Egyptian symbolism. The buildings of the temple group were ornamented with 1,453 columns of Parian marble, magnificently sculptured, and 2,906 pilasters decorated with capitals. There was a broad porch facing the east. So we can see the rising sun, right? And a sanctum sanctorum was upon the west. The sanctum sanctorum we can see in Doctor Strange. So in Doctor Strange, his place of rest and magic and training and all his cool stuff was called the sanctum sanctorum. And so these things are written all in our media, comic books and whatnot. Okay, let's go back to where I was. According to tradition, the various buildings and courtyards could hold in all 300,000 persons. Both the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies were entirely lined with solid gold plates encrusted with jewels. King Solomon began the building of the temple in the 4th year of his reign on what would be, according to modern calculations, the 21st day of April, and finished it in the 11th year of his reign on the 23rd day of October. The temple was begun in the 480th year after the children of Israel had passed the Red Sea. Part of the labor of construction included the building of an artificial foundation on the brow of Mount Moriah. The stones for the temple were hoisted from quarries directly beneath Mount Moriah and were trued before being brought to the surface. The brass and golden ornaments for the temple were cast in molds in the clay ground between Sukkoth and Zeradatha, and the wooden parts were all finished before they reached the temple site. The building was put together, consequently, without sound and without instruments. All its parts fit exactly, without the hammer of contention, the axe of division, or any tool of mischief. I know, isn't that interesting? Nice, I agree. But Dagon's temple and the finest structure of Tyre and Sidon could not be compared with the eternal God's temple at Jerusalem. There were employed about it no less than 3,600 princes or master masons to conduct the work according to Solomon's direction, with 80,000 hewers of stone in the mountain or fellow craftsmen and 70,000 laborers, in all 153,600 besides the levy under Oderiams to work in the mountains of Lebanon by turns with the Sidonians, these 30,000 beings in all. 183,600,000. It's a lot of numbers. Daniel Sickles gives 3,300 overseers instead of 3,600 and lists the 3 grand masters separately. The same author estimates the cost of the temple at nearly 4,000 millions of dollars. That's a lot. 4,000 millions of dollars. I didn't know that was even a number. So I knew there was a number that could amount to that, but I didn't know that would be how you say that. 4,000 millions of dollars. That's, yeah, okay. The Masonic legend of the building of Solomon's temple does not in every particular parallel the scriptural version, but especially in those portions related to Hiram Abiff. According to the biblical account, this master workman returned to his own country. In the Masonic allegory, he was actually foully murdered. On this point, Edward Arthur Waite, in his new Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, makes the following explanatory comments. The legend of the Master Builder is the great allegory of Masonry. It happens that his figurative story is grounded on the fact of personality mentioned in Holy Scripture. But this historical background is of the accidents and not the essence. The significance is in the allegory, and not in any point of history which may lie behind it. Edward Arthur Waite, who created the, Waite Rider deck, tarot deck that most everyone knows, he was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in the early 1900s, late 1800s, which is the magical society. I would state is a hard word, because it is a direct causation, and I was never there. But through my readings, 3 guys were Freemasons and were like, we need a magical society because this ain't enough. We have all these cool writings and rituals and like practices from like Eastern mysticism, sacred sciences. And they integrated that and created the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn to kind of vivify the magical world of that time frame. And then we get that, if you watch or read Sandman by Neil Gaiman, read it, watch it later. And I'm making some episodes on it, so watch those. I'm going to show you everything that Netflix didn't add into it, which was a lot of the magical, esoteric, and mythological significances that are quite important, and they bastardized like they do most things that are beautiful, which is what the modern day Hollywood does. But alas, we move on. Hiram, as a master of the builders, divided his workmen into 3 groups, which were termed entered apprentice, fellow craftsmen, and master masons. This is what we just got done reading about in the Lost Keys of Freemasonry. Each person that he appointed in those 3 groups are the first, second, and third degrees in the Freemasonic Lodge. So there's a reason we're doing this in this kind of order. To each division, he gave certain passwords and signs by which their respective excellence could be quickly determined. While all were classified according to their merits, some were dissatisfied, for they desired a more exalted position than they were capable of fulfilling. At last, 3 fellow craftsmen, more daring than their companions, determined to force Hiram to reveal to them the password of the master's degree. Knowing that Hiram always went into the unfinished sanctum sanctorum at high noon to pray, these 3 ruffians, who are obviously, as it's stated here, not master masons, so they were not honored at the highest degree of Freemasonry, which is 3 degrees, the master mason. So that also realize that means anybody who tells you that they are a 33rd, 32nd, anything between the 3rd degree to the 33rd degree, which is an honorary degree, it's not what everyone thinks, like in the conspiracy occult world that doesn't understand the mythologies of what's going on. All those things are honorary degrees of stuff as a scholar, philosopher, or somebody who just wants to be able to read more and go through more initiations to unfold their own consciousness can do, like in the Scottish Rite, the York Rite, or what the Shriners are, right? Each one of them has their own meaning, so you do your own studies and your own degrees. But there are only 3 degrees in true Blue Lodge Masonry. So no crazy 32nd degree satanic worshiper running the world like that. That's not how things really work. And I'm not saying there isn't 32nd degree people out there running the world, but I'm saying is that the Freemason, that's not a Freemason of what we've learned through Manly P. Hall's work. That's just a really not okay person. That's a person of bad character, bad worth, and bad merit who's trying to manipulate the world. And that's not what these practices are for. So I think upon this reading is that makes it so they are not Masons anymore. They will die and then have to do it all again. They didn't become exalted to the highest degrees of what the world is putting them through, because the world is the lodge. The world is the mystery school. So I go on. To each division, he gave certain passwords. Okay, I read that. At last, 3 fellow craftsmen, more daring than their companions, determined to force Hiram to reveal them the password of the master's degree. Knowing that Hiram always went into the unfinished sanctum sanctorum at high noon to pray, these ruffians, whose names were Jubela, Jubelo and Jubelum lay in wait for him, one at each of the main gates of the temple. Hiram, about to leave the temple by the south gate, was suddenly confronted by Jubela, armed with a 24-inch gauge. Upon Hiram's refusal to reveal the master's word, the ruffian struck him on the throat with the rule, and the wounded master then hastened to the west gate, where Jubelo, armed with a square, awaited him and made a similar demand. Again, Hiram was silent, and the second assassin struck him on the breast with the square. Hiram thereupon staggered to the east gate, only to be met there by Jubelum, armed with a maul. When Hiram refused him with the master's word, Jubelum struck the master between the eyes with the mallet, and Hiram fell dead. That is not how you get the password from somebody, right? And all of a sudden now he can never give them the password. What my understanding is that the password will only work if you've already truly exemplified yourself in each degree, in each grade. It's kind of like the video game world, right? Or in a lot of our comic books and stories, you go through, you have the one character going through the bad guys, and the bad guys not getting what they want, so the bad guys try harder every time because they've been sent on a fool's path. What they're truly looking for isn't the password. They're trying to get what the password means, like the means of what it is for the Master Mason. It's like when you get there, you know, mere words aren't what you're looking for, so-calledly. It's a metaphor, it's an analogy, a myth. It's you living the life of the Master Mason, of the Buddha, right? Of these different characters throughout the world. Be Tanjiro. Be somebody who would sacrifice himself to save his family member and try to bring them back into a human body instead of being a demon. Be Kirito, trying to save the whole world who's stuck in a video game and they can't get out. And so he has to sacrifice himself at the end boss, right? And then there's many, Itadori dies and then comes back to life. Naruto dies many times and then is brought back to life, only to then try to sacrifice his life more and more. And so the body of Hiram was buried by the murderers over the brow of Mount Moriah, and a sprig of acacia placed upon the grave. Interesting enough, acacia makes DMT, another psychedelic plant, when mixed with the right things, can bring upon the feelings of other worlds and the dream time, right? DMT is what is expelled from the pineal gland at night, and when you're born and when you die, and every evening. It's just done at mass quantities when you die. So make the connection as you will. The murderers then sought to escape punishment for their crimes by embarking for Ethiopia. Interesting. Okay, Ethiopia, let's go there. But the port was closed. Can't go there. All three were finally captured, and after admitting their guilt, were duly executed. Rightfully so. Parties of three were then sent out by King Solomon, and one of these groups discovered the newly made grave marked by the evergreen sprig. After the injured apprentices and the fellow craftsmen had failed to resurrect their master from the dead, he was finally raised by the Master Mason with the strong grip of the lion's paw. Wild. To the initiated builder, the name Hiram Abiff signifies my father, the universal spirit, one in essence, three in aspect. Thus, the murdered master is a type of the cosmic martyr, the crucified spirit of good, the dying God, whose mystery is celebrated throughout the world. Among the manuscripts of Dr. Sigmund Backstrom, the initiated Rosicrucian, appears the following extract from von Welling, concerned the true philosophic nature of Masonic Hiram. The original word, Hiram, which they then pronounce in Hebrew, is a radical word consisting of three consonants, Cheth, Resh, and Mem. Cheth signifies Chama, the sunlight. For example, the universal, invisible, cold fire of nature attracted by the sun, manifested into light and sent down to us, and to every planetary body belonging to the solar system. Resh signifies Rauk, or spirit, air, wind, as the being, the vehicle which conveys and collects the light into numberless foci, wherein the solar rays of light are agitated by a circular motion and manifested in heat and burning fire. Mem signifies Majim, water, humidity, but rather the mother of water, for example, radical humidity, or a particular kind of condensed air. These three constitute the universal agent or fire of nature in one word, Hiram, not Hiram, or Hiram. CH instead of just an H. Interesting enough when I come to think of that. So what they're saying is that there's these certain Hebrew letters, and when put together, they equate to a number. And then that number can be arranged in a way that creates more letters, and those letters make a name or a word. That's these first Hebrew letters create a word. That word has a number. That number then can be rearranged, can mean a number of Hebrew letters that create a word. That is called Gematria. What I think the greatest kind of Gematria, it's tough when I say greatest kind. I don't mean the absolutely greatest, but the best, one of the most refined ways of understanding Gematria is through mythology, which I'm stating this because of in the conspiratorial occult world, the world of, let me restate that, the world of conspiracy, the conspiracy theorists, which I love, they go a little far at times and they use Gematria in a way that they don't understand. And so they don't understand that Gematria is a way for people to understand patterns and things, certain things connecting to other things. And these patterns can be, you can then find truth from these patterns. However, you can find anything in these patterns as well. So having an understanding of the symbols and signs and the mythologies then can help you truly understand what mythology was talking about. Right. You're right. Katakesh, you're right, actually. It was in Children of Dune. And that means I need to relook at Children of Dune because I forgot about that. They talk about Hiram. Hiram mention was interesting to say the least. Yeah, that's good. Nice. So great. Thank you. I will look into that more. And so it's interesting enough, a long ramble of Gematria. Gematria can be used to create better models of understanding the world. Also can be used to be more schizophrenic, and all of a sudden everything is a symbol and sign and you can't even move because of you're seeing signs and symbols everywhere. That's not how you're supposed to live in the world. You're supposed to be able to turn on the mind that sees the patterns and understand their significances, and then you're supposed to understand that some things are just correlated and they're not always caused by themselves. So that is important. We're going to go a little bit further into this, and then we'll go from there. Albert Pike mentions several forms of the name Hiram, which is Kurm or Kurm, Churm, Chirm, and Kur-Om, Chur-Om, the latter ending in the sacred Hindu monosyllable Om, which may also be extracted from the names of the three murderers. Pike further relates the three ruffians to a triad of stars in the constellation of Libra, and also calls attention to the fact that the Chaldean god Baal, metamorphosized into a demon by the Jews, appears in the name of each of the murderers, Jew Bello, and Jew Belam. To interpret the Hyramic legend requires familiarity with both the Pythagorean and the Kabbalistic system of numbers and letters, and also the philosophic and astronomic cycles of the Egyptians, Chaldeans, and Brahmins. So, saying, what should you study? Study Pythagoras, study the Kabbalah, and study astrology. All three of these things will help you understand the world better and understand these myths better. And what does that mean? That means that once you start studying all these things, you are on the path of the magician. You are on your hero's journey. Upon the hero's journey, you will just have to understand a new way of reading the world, because of the one we're taught at youth through our school systems and our families doesn't always have all the answers. And so we must reach to the sages and the ancients and the philosophers of old for these answers. And you come to find out that one metaphor of saying it is that there is always more hunchbacks than soldiers, and that's a Aleister Crowley essay that he wrote, and I did thoroughly enjoy it because the whole idea of the Hunchback and the Soldier is that there will always be more questions than answers. And that is the idea Robert Anton Wilson talks when he says, when he asks the Zen parable, who is the master who makes the grass green? And as being a Zen parable, that's what it's meant to do, the silence. It's meant for the robot to kind of question everything and all of a sudden be like, wait a second. The way I experience reality and perceive things may not be truly everything that's going on. And how can it be? Especially because it's this simple way of seeing things, but we don't even see all of the lights. We don't see all of the light spectrum or the color spectrum. So there's tons of, we don't see Wi-Fi and airwaves, and we don't, there's a lot of things we don't see, the occult aspects of our experience. These forces of the planets on our person. And it's when we truly can embody those things, again, what we're learning on the hero's journey, on these the path of resurrecting the father, Hiram, or putting back Osiris together, that you as the son then have transmutated yourself because of along that journey that you've taken to do such a thing, you have become different. And that's what Joseph Campbell talks about in his Heroes with a Thousand Faces, in the hero's journey motif, that you must always return home. And when you return home or to your kingdom or to your everyday existence, you have been changed. And so you will see things differently. And that's how you bring wisdom back to your community, that tribal wisdom, because there always has to be one to come back from going out in the world again. So. Where are we? Okay. The first temple of Solomon stood for 33 years in its pristine splendor. At the end of that time, it was pillaged by the Egyptian king Shishak, and finally, in 588 BC, it was completely destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and the people of Jerusalem were led into captivity to Babylon. Also, King David ruled for 33 years in Jerusalem. The Masonic order is divided into 33 symbolic degrees. There are 33 segments in the human spinal column, and Jesus was crucified in the 33rd year of his life. The efforts made to discover the origin of the Hyramic legend show that, while the legend in its present form is comparatively modern, its underlying principles run back to remotest antiquity. It's generally admitted by modern Masonic scholars that the story of the martyred Hiram is based upon the Egyptian rites of Osiris, whose death and resurrection figuratively portrayed the spiritual death of man and his regeneration through initiation into the mysteries. Hiram is also identified with Hermes through the inscription of the Emerald Tablet. From these associations, it is evident that Hiram is to be considered as a prototype of humanity. In fact, he is Plato's ideal archetype of man. As Adam after the fall symbolizes the idea of human degeneration, so Hiram through his resurrection symbolizes the idea of human regeneration. And so I really like that. I like the idea. It was written in a book on theurgy, and Iamblichus, the Neoplatonic thinker who Julian at that time, the Emperor Julian, said was the great Plato. And so that's pretty high praise. And what he stated in that book was on theurgy, or the bringing down. Theurgy is the more religious theological practice, the magical practice of bringing the divine into your body and merging with divinity through ritual and dedication practices. And so what he says was that actually theurgy is playing out the first few books of the Bible, playing out of Genesis and the fall in reverse. And so instead of us breaking ourselves away from the Godhead and the tree of life, so if you have the tree of life, which most of us have all seen, you have the 10 Sephirah, and they're all connected by paths. In the very top, Kether, and it goes all the way down to Malkuth, which is the kingdom at the bottom. Kether has, and it's two offshoots, Chokmah and Bina. These are these sephiras, these diagrams, this map of reality that has been around for a very long time, pre even Jewish mysticism, is stating that these three, they call them a supernull, each triad of things, right? A lot of theology, there's a lot of triads, a lot of threes going on. And so this triad of things, you have these three at the top, and they've broken away. Think of one, it's like a electrical bulb exploded. There's a circuit explosion, and all of a sudden, in that circuit explosion, right below the first three sephira, the rest of these 7 have broken away from the tree, and so we have been taken away from the Godhead and that divine light and energy, which is then why we're in such a corrupted state. It's a very I'm kind of riffing here, so it's not a direct. There's a better way of stating that, but that's exactly what this. Kabbalistic, mystical, mythological metaphor of what the fall of man is. That's a way of seeing it. And so if what we're trying to do in our practices of the Mason's practice of Hiram, right, of what they're talking about, is that when we're resurrecting Hiram from his fallen state as the son of the widow of Isis, we're trying to bring Osiris back together, we are connecting ourselves back with the Godhead, with divinity. And so we don't have to be separate anymore. We can truly integrate ourselves into one. That happened in a great comic book, right? To bring it back to the comic book references, go out, don't watch. Read Promethea by Alan Moore. And he really goes through every single sephira, and the main character, Promethea, or Sophie, goes through. Sophie becomes the Promethean character, Prometheus, this superhero in Vertigo comics at that time. And she moves her way up, and they diagram it, and Alan Moore and J.H. Williams III, two of the greatest comic book writer artist team ups has ever been. You get to see her go all through every single path in Sephira, and I think it's beautiful. And you truly go through something. J.H. Williams III actually talks about in his different script notes that you can find online when he's writing back to Alan Moore, he talks about, and in different interviews, he talks about how he actually went through crazy stuff as he drew each Sephira and path. And so that's a great book to go out and find, Promethea by Alan Moore, to kind of understand these different mythologies that they are going through, because you get to truly understand that Osirian cycle of the rising and dying god. And so as we go in reverse, right, what they state is, and that happens in many other mythologies, right, is that the son of Naruto he doesn't have his parents, and so he's got to rise above and become Hokage, which is the leader of the village, from a very low state to a high. He realizes his divinity, not only by birth and karma, but by his father. His father's got this bright yellow hair, and he's called the Flash, right? I'm going to be hit up on by a lot of nerds out there who that's not exactly what his name is. I can't remember at the time, but huge Naruto fan. Minato's the man. And so he's so quick. He's the the yellow Flash. Thank you. Came to me. It came to me. He's the yellow Flash, and he's so fast. Basically, blink of an eye, light speed, whatever it is. He epitomizes this sun-like figure, with his mother Kushina being able to bind things with her powers. And so she's got that Isis motherly figure, but they're both gone in that one. But Naruto, he is actually the lineage of Cain and Abel. He's got this warring brothers motif going on from the beginning of time, from the beginning of ninja, from the Ninshu. You get this godlike creature in Kaguya coming down and having children with a tribal leader. And then all of a sudden, this legacy happens between a war of two brothers warring. One is going to bring friends around and be raised up that way and be for the light and virtue. And then the brother who wants all power because he doesn't feel seen is that Cain and Abel thing. So instead of, we're bringing it back and reuniting ourselves with the all that is, to try to be the best people that we can be. So it's all about being the best you can be, truly. And that's, again, leads into the nerdiness of why I think good storytelling is really meant to help humans in this world, and we really must bring that back. And so I'm going to talk about it as much as possible. I'm going to also we're going to, next episode, continue with the legend of Hiram and understanding Freemasonry, and go on from there and understand all the adeptship and what it takes to be an adept on this path, the fully realized individual that I know every one of us can be, to bring upon a better world, make good choices, and burn off all that dead ash and that karma that's holding us back to creating a positive world. And so I'm coming out with a video soon. Kaguro Baki, I recommend everyone look into it or watch my video. If you watch my video on Kaguro Baki, it is chapter 1 of the manga. There is not an anime out yet, but there will be. And when it will come out, it will break the internet. It'll be amazing. It'll be, I think, it'll be better than Jujutsu Kaisen, because the ending will be amazing. Of what I quote in there, what we see is that it'll never be the big three, Naruto, Bleach, and One Piece, because that's kind of in the motif of big threeness, but I think will be goated like them, hopefully in the end. I will state, greatest anime of all time, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Fight me over it. And so, yeah, I'll be coming out with Kaguro Baki chapter 1, my breakdown of it and what's going on. So if you haven't even ever read it or ever heard of it, you can read along with me, because I will be explaining it and having the manga panels up there. As well as one of the greatest literary achievements of all time by Neil Gaiman, The Sandman. I will be coming out with that, episode 1, chapter 1. How Netflix did us dirty in this season, and how season 2 will be coming out in July 2025. And most likely it'll continue to do us all dirty. However, something makes me want to watch it more than just wanting to make videos on it, because today, again, we crave for good stories. And I want to see some people will never read Sandman, the comic book, and that will make me cry, because Sandman, the comic book, is one of the greatest literary achievements of all time. It's amazing. And if people only know Sandman because of Netflix, they will be missing such amazingness. It's kind of like the same people who only ever watch Dune, the movies by Denis Villeneuve. They're trash. But those movies are so terrible. They're some of the greatest cinematography of all time, I think. And the first one had promise. And I could look by a lot of the things I didn't like, and I was like, man, if they do part 2 amazing, if they actually pull it off, I think this could be a great representation of what Frank Herbert did with Dune. And then Dune Part 2 came out, and it took all of Frank Herbert's greatness and what could have been, and it threw it in the toilet because of propaganda and because of bad writing and not understanding characters and understanding archetypes, and then thinking you can just change anything. And so I'm going to be coming out with that video sometime. Things that I dislike and why I dislike Dune Part 2 the most. Yeah, so that'll happen. And it's not just dislike, because there are a lot of dislike videos out there of certain stories. I will be telling it in a Magus in the media way, which is I will use the sword of reason right here, and I will chop it apart in a mythological, metaphorical way, showing you how we are objectively correct take. Thank you, Katakesh. I appreciate that. That makes me feel good. It's because it's just true. So yeah, I'll be coming out with a video on Dune Part 2, or Dune by Denis Villeneuve, on why I think that is trash writing, and anybody who thinks otherwise just doesn't know any better because they've never read the story. So I give you compassion and empathy because you just don't know any better. So watch that when that comes out. Episode 8, I will have that most likely, like we've been doing, Monday night, 6:30 p.m. Central Time. And I hope everyone has an amazing rest of their day and their week. And I will be coming out with my Kaguro Baki video tomorrow, so watch that. And I would love everyone to subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell so I can continue doing this and we can create Magus in the media, the community that is looking to help the world. Have a wonderful evening.